Started officially. You can see we have a quartet here. Normally we have a quintet. And we're making calls to our regular member and our two alternates to see if they are able to make it. If there are only 4 people here, you have the right to postpone your hearing until you have a full board. It requires a vote of 3 out of the 3 of the
Majority vote.
3 of the 5 or 3 of the 4 to have a variance passed. So the odds are better if you get 3 out of 5, 60% versus betting 750 if you want to get a variance. So if you bear with us a few minutes while we make these calls. Also, the board has asked that we take items.
We haven't started the meeting, so
Okay.
I say that we do that on the record,
Okay, all right.
because there shouldn't be any decisions of the board made yet.
I could play split personality if you'd like.
You're bipolar or multipolar?
Could go and change seats.
You from Chicago? What? How many times can you vote?
Am I dead? Are you dead or are you alive? What is that? Am I a Democrat?
My mother grew up in Chicago in Shane,
It must be.
and in her precinct,
Yeah, these might be some of the
like
newest ones. I think these are
710.
98. So there's that.
Can we approve the minutes with only 2 members from the
Yeah.
previous meeting?
I can have to vote. To the Board of Adjustment meeting of March 27, 2019. Let's start with a roll call vote, please, Kim.
Chairman Elliott,
Here.
Mr. Obowski,
Here.
Mr. Burris,
Here.
Mr. Eisner,
Here.
Ms. Turner, Mr. Glenzer, Ms. Rich.
Okay, as I mentioned before, now we're on the record. We have 4 members here, and the vote of 3 is required for a variance. We have calls into the 3 members who are not here, our official member and 2 alternates. And they may come at any time this evening, of course. But you have the right, if you feel that you'd be better off with a full board, you can let somebody know, either on my left, Ms. Yothers, or our legal counsel, and on my right, that you wish to postpone your hearing. There's also been a request to take application 19-15, Tooks Road first, and the Seabreeze Drive after that, and let them go on their merry way, or maybe I spoke too soon, on their way. Maybe it won't be so merry. We don't know. Maybe I premature in saying that, but at least it'll be shorter. And I've been through many times in this audience where you have to wait 2 hours for a 5-minute discussion. So we're going to take those 2 out of order. Tooks Road first, and then Seabreeze Drive. So let's begin with our quasi-judicial announcement, and the swearing in of our speakers from our legal counsel, please.
This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Board of Adjustment acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Are there any members of the board wishing to disclose any conflicts of interest or ex parte communications this evening? Seeing none. Anyone wishing to speak this evening, if you could please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So sworn.
Okay, thank you. Next, my usual comment, please let's silence all of our cell phones and other gadgets, please. When you get to the podium, please state your name and your address, and we will proceed. Does anybody, first of all, wish to have a postponement of their hearing because of the 4 members of the board? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Cindy Terrapini. I represent the property owners on item number 1. We are willing to, obviously you're going to take the other 2 cases first. We're happy to wait, and perhaps the 5th member would come before our case is heard. If that person doesn't come, we would like to continue the case to the next month. But we will stay on hold as you to review the first 2 cases. Thank you.
Okay. Is it fair with everybody? Just wait and see. And my comment about taking things out of order is by no means a reflection on the merits of anybody's case. It's just in our experience, some will take place quicker, and those are the ones that have staff recommendations for approval, and those are the first 2 tonight. First one being 1173 Tooks Road. For the benefit of our vast television audience, that's the street that bisects Anderson Park. So let's begin with our staff recommendation, please.
This is a request for a variance to reduce the required front yard setback in order to allow for a shed. This is at 1173 Tooks Road in the single-family residential R70 district, residential urban land use. And this applicant is requesting a front yard setback from the required 25 feet to 14.47 feet to accommodate an existing shed that's about 75 square feet in area located within the front yard setback. The lot is not technically, it is actually technically conforming, but as you can see by the survey that the applicant has provided that shows the shed, the total lot width meets the R70 district, but the lot is at the end of Tooks Road, and the frontage jogs around to the end of Tooks Road. So the kind of the functional frontage is about 50 feet. Just hit the highlights of the review criteria. This lot, again, is at the end of Tooks Road, and it's surrounded by water. So it has basically the lake and the canal feature that surrounds it. As you can see by the survey, it's severely physically limited. There's not much land there. Most of the lot is located within the water. There is a 15-foot water setback required around the lot. So there is limited area for where the applicant could put the shed. So the need for the variance arises from the odd shape and severe physical limitations of the property. And the applicant must maintain that 15-foot setback from the water. The shed is located on the east corner of the property under the existing trees. And with the required shoreline setback, this seems to be one of the few options available for placing a shed. The special circumstances of the property have not been self-created or resulted from any action by the applicant. These are physical constraints on the property. Literal enforcement of the standards would limit the development on the property. Again, there aren't many options for placement of the shed. It's technically in the front yard, but really functionally it's kind of, it's not in front of the house or on a driveway. It's over to the side, more of a functional side yard area. It's a small shed, reasonable. accessory use for this structure. It's only about 75 square feet. And granting the variance will not confer a special privilege on this owner since single-family residential districts normally allow sheds and have sheds existing. Granting the variance will not substantially diminish property values or interfere with the neighborhood. Tooks Road is a pretty kind of closely situated place. There's a lot of structures and accessory structures, and this one in no way interferes with the neighborhood. I have added one item for you, which is Section 215.02F of your criteria that allows you to look at circumstances where it can be demonstrated that the owner of a previous property owner, I guess, took an action that the current owner was not aware of, did not cause, and could not reasonably have discovered. I went ahead and put that on this item under that. The shed is shown on the survey. The survey was done before the current owner purchased the property. This became the subject of a code enforcement case. That's how it came up. A permit could not be located, so it was not a situation where the current owner willfully placed or built something without a permit. So I went ahead and kind of included that section of code as just kind of what leads us to be here tonight with this request. If the shed were removed or destroyed, the current owner would have to comply with the setbacks or obtain a new variance to place a new shed. If this variance is granted, the owner will need to pull an after-the-fact building permit. The shed will have to comply with the building code in order to close his code enforcement case. This application was properly noticed. We didn't receive any responses to the notice, and staff is recommending approval of a variance for relief from the minimum front yard setbacks to allow this shed to remain in place.
Thank
Are
you
there
very
any
much,
questions?
Mrs. McNeese. Is there anybody in opposition to this variance in the audience tonight? Is the applicant here? Would you like to make a statement, sir?
Good evening. I'm Alex Gardner, resident at 1173 Tukes Road. Ms. McNeese, I don't think I could have said it any better than she did. I think she presented a very strong case for me, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Comments from the board, questions?
I have a quick question, just, Tricia,
And you can have a mic.
you want mic on the mic?
Mic on the
Sure.
mic.
Okay. On here, there has a parcel 2. Would you be able to explain what that is? 'Cause that looks like it's.
On the survey?
Yeah.
Okay, this area of Tooks Road, it's made up of, for lack of a better term, acreage. It's not a recorded plat. It's not an unrecorded plat. This is divided up land that probably, with all individual legal descriptions, the solid line is obviously the property that the applicant owns. Those two parcels probably were parcels, individual parcels at one time. I don't know the history of it, but the property that's owned is within the solid boundary on the survey. But yeah, it's just kind of a hodgepodge of property out there.
So it's not owned by this homeowner?
Everything within that solid line is owned by the applicant.
Okay.
Is that?
I just didn't know if there was going to be something buildable on it to somewhere down the road.
The blue line with the little wavy, that's the water line.
That's what I mean. So somebody owns the water?
Yeah, that's not uncommon, owning Bay Bottom. Not uncommon at all. Well, it might be here, but other places in Florida. But that doesn't mean you can do anything with it other than put a dock or, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
I have no further questions then.
Anyone else have any questions, comments? Anybody in the audience to speak on this item?
You looking for a motion?
I'm just trying to look. Okay, ready for a motion?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? I believe this is the second application that the board has ever gotten for a storage shed. The first was mine 40 years ago. I was city attorney, didn't want to have any problems, so did it the right way. But thank you for also going through the process. Okay, let's have a vote, please.
Mr. Eisner?
Yes.
Mr. Burris?
Yes.
Mr. Obowski?
Yes.
Mr. Elliott?
Yes. Okay, you're aware of the procedural requirements. Now you have to get a permit and go through all that. Okay, thank you. Okay, the next item is 1618 Seabreeze Drive. Let's have a staff report, please. Patricia.
this is to authorize a variance to reduce the required side yard setback to allow for an addition to a single-family residence located at 1618 Seabreeze Drive in the R100 Single Family Residential District and Residential Low Land Use. The applicant is requesting a variance to reduce the minimum side yard setback on the east side of the property from the required 10 feet to 8.9 feet, and the total side yard setback from the required 25 feet to 19.3 feet to construct an addition to this residence. The current setbacks are single minimum on the east side of 5.1 feet and a total of 15.4 feet. The applicant proposes to remove the lanai in the rear and follow the line of the principal structure. So that will actually enlarge that east yard by 3.8 feet. So the resulting setbacks, if this variance is granted, will be 8.9 feet on the east side, minimum of 8.9 feet, and a total of 19.2 feet. This is a non-conforming lot in the R100 district. This plat, you're familiar with, this area was platted in the 1950s. This house was built in 1972. So the width of the lot is non-conforming at about 70 feet. And I can just hit the highlights of the review criteria, and then if you have any questions, we can go through those. Basically, the conditions and special circumstances associated with the variance, namely the non-conforming lot width, were not self-created or resulted from an action by the applicant. The strict application of the dimensional standards would limit the ability to do the addition on the house. And the addition would not increase the nonconformity, but would actually decrease the nonconformity on the property. Granting of the variance will not adversely affect surrounding properties or diminish property values, and will, in fact, have a potentially improved effect on the adjacent owner to the east. This application was noticed. Staff did have one member of the public come in and review the file, but there were no comments received on the application. Staff is recommending approval of the variance for relief from the minimum side yard and the total side yard setback requirements. Are there any questions?
Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak on this item? Okay, let's hear from the applicant, please, if you have any questions or comments.
Hi, my name is Robin Weichel and 1618 Seabreeze, and I also will just yield to the staff that did the homework that I wasn't able to do. So I thank you as a committee for serving for our city, and I want to tell you that the staff really was gracious in helping me walk through the process of what I needed to bring in and not bring in. So I appreciate it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, comments from the board, questions? I have one or two. As I understand it, right now, the east side is 5.1 feet from the property line, and the applicant wants to make it 8.9 feet. So why does she need a variance? It's less of a problem than it is.
It is less of a problem, but it's still non-conforming to the required setbacks. So some of those on Seabreeze Drive that you've had where the non-conforming setback is extended with an addition, this would be kind of similar to that.
What you're saying then is someone needs a variance even though it's less of a variance than they already have. Is that right?
The variance is from the required code criteria. So as long as it's not meeting that minimum 10, minimum total 25, they need the variance regardless of what the numbers are.
There's no grandfathering, I guess is another way of saying it?
Well, what's there is obviously legal non-conforming, but this is a proposal for an addition that extends back past the lanai.
But it's less of an encroachment than the current.
So for example, say, and I do not wish this upon you, but say a storm comes and completely demolishes that house. Whatever is built there must be built to the current code. Since this was built prior to the code, it's a legal non-conforming structure. Removing the lanai and putting on an addition is basically a new build, and it must comply with the code. This is reduction in the non-conformity, but it still doesn't comply with the current code. So yes, it needs to be varied from the requirements of the code.
Hold that thought for a
So,
second.
and to further clarify, if they were rebuilding something in the footprint of the current lanai, then they wouldn't need to
There's
do anything.
also a ruling that a variance, when we give a variance, it stays with the house from here on. So
Correct.
wouldn't the variance that they originally got,
They didn't get an original.
Well,
so then how did they?
whether they did or not.
Yeah, in this, according to the staff report, and please correct me, Pat, if I'm wrong, this home was built prior to the code being prior to the code being enforced. So there were no setback requirements at that time that are presently in your code. So it was a legal non-conforming use because it was built prior to this land development code and these setbacks becoming law. So they didn't have to get a variance. They were grandfathered in to use the chairman's term.
Oh,
Can I get back to that, pursuing that point just a little bit, kind of academic, but if there is a storm and it's less than 50% demolished,
That has to do with the Florida Building Code, and
no,
that is not
we have a
something-
zoning provision that if a non-conforming structure is demolished less than 50% of its value, not the FEMA requirements for substantial improvement, but they can rebuild to that same footprint, I believe. It's only when it's more than 50% demolished.
And that's not before the board this evening.
No, I know, okay.
You're right, that was an
I can-
academic question.
Answer
Okay.
that if you want.
this is a learning process as well.
I was just using it as a,
Okay.
as if.
All right. So-
Bless you.
Yeah.
All right, we ready for a question?
I think we're out of questions. We're waiting for a
Okay, motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Mr. Eisner, second by, who wants to take it? Mr. Burris,
I'll take it.
to approve the variance as requested. Any discussion on the motion? Just want to thank the applicant for electing to stay in our little village. You're a great asset to our city, and you're beautiful home here. I can't tell north from south, but I guess this is on the east side. It would be a great addition. And beautiful. Okay, vote please, Ms. Yoder.
Mr. Eisner?
Approve.
Mr. Burris?
Yes.
Mr. Abowski?
Yes.
Mr. Elliott?
Yes. Okay. I forget, you have 2 years to pull a permit or one?
Two.
2 years.
2.
2 years to get started. Okay, Mrs. Terrapini, you have any statement to make?
Again, Cindy Terrapini. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, there has not been a fifth member arrive, and we would prefer to have a full board for this item. So the applicant would request a continuance, and that is that meeting date April 24th. Is that the correct date?
Any comments from anybody in the audience or our legal counsel or anybody on the board? Request for a continuance? I looked in our rules. I didn't see anything specifically addressed to this issue, and it should be.
I actually was going to comment on that there isn't anything in your rules that allows for the applicant to continue because there's not a full board. However, if the applicant chooses to continue and the board approves that, obviously if it's at the board's will, you can certainly do so.
Yeah, we've considered that issue in the past. And so, any comments from anybody in the audience on this? I know it's an inconvenience for those of you who are here to speak, but they have a right to get a full board, and the adjacent property owners.
Have a right to a full board because we can't guarantee that there will be a full board at the April 24th meeting either.
Right.
There's no right to the full board. There's only a right to a quorum.
I stand corrected. So the meeting is going to be continued if the motion passes to get it to their next meeting, April 24th. And the adjacent property owners also may have some benefits from having a full board as well.
We want to make it clear that they have an opportunity to object. So if there's anybody here that would want to object to the continuance, this would be the opportunity, the time that you would want to object to a continuance. Otherwise, we're going to vote to continue it.
And I would say on that point, not just anyone, you would have to be an affected party, so I would have to ask some questions. But if there is anyone wishing to object, we can do the inquiry, and then you can state your objection on the record to a vote to continue it to the April 24th meeting.
I have a question.
Mr. Burris?
Yes, if we don't have a full board the next time, do we continue again?
Good question.
I mean, that would be at the will of the board. We would go through this same thing. It's not otherwise addressed in your rules of procedure. It's not otherwise addressed in the code. From a legal perspective, there's nothing that says that you can't do it if it's at the agreement of the board and the board wishes to do so. My only problem is only when we ever start a presentation and then choose in the middle to continue it and start it back up at another meeting. That's usually where I have my issues. But if the board chooses to continue this to the next meeting, you can certainly do so, or the applicant has the ability to withdraw their application. But at some point, the applicant does have the right to due process. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cindy Terrapini. Just to reassure the board, it's not our intent to continue for months on end. The applicants have a pending building permit that depends on the outcome of this variance. So it just seems to us, without a full board, without even an alternate here, it's in our opinion that we'd like to continue for 1 month. And hopefully we'll have 4 and hopefully 5. But like I said, we're not playing any games. We're not trying to continue for months on end to, so the applicant or the other property owners don't show up. That's not our intent at all. It's just the ability to have a full board, if that's possible, at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. It is very unusual to have less than 5 people, I will say.
This board's usually full with an additional.
Make every effort to. Anybody here tonight who cannot make next month's meeting?
That's also not an issue if we get the other 2 or 3 to show up. So
Well, at least get 4 for sure. Okay. All right. Is there a motion to continue?
I didn't say anything.
Motion to continue. Yep. There you go.
All right. Mr. Burris makes a motion. Mr.
Continue.
Kowalski. Continue to our April 20.
Second.
What date is that again?
April 24th.
24th. Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Eisner?
Yes.
Mr. Burris,
Yes.
Mr. Rabowski,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott.
Yes. And one thing, procedurally, I did on my own, I created a little easel over there. I think if we could have a large picture of the property in question so that when we're talking about it, we could point to something so that we all would know, rather than walking up and down. There's no closed circuit television that could solve the problem, but hopefully we'll
There
have some.
we could probably have them pull the screen down and do it with a computer if that's something, but that's going to be up to the applicant, how they want to present their case.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cindy Terrapini. I do have a booklet that I will bring back to the April meeting so that each of you will have specifically, it has a variety of things, but the one thing I think you're most interested in, Mr. Chairman, is the site plan, and then so that we can discuss from that. So I'll have that
Everybody
for
in the
each of you.
audience and even our television viewers would like to see what we're talking about rather than walking up and down and trying to go to page 4.
Sure. I mean,
But
if
if
there's
it's-
an Elmo machine or a projector that we can use, I'm happy to use that at the next meeting. Whatever however you guys would.
We have a PowerPoint.
I know there's a
Capable-
laptop connection, but I have to talk to the guys upstairs to figure out what
I
technology.
can coordinate with the applicant and see what modes they would like to present and if we can accommodate it.
You recognize the
So-
problem we've had in the past where
Yes.
people are, if you look at this door, what door are you talking about? And they have to walk back and forth and show a door and no one else can see it in the audience.
Thank
can
you.
have a
I'm
little
happy
bit.
to work with Ms. McNeese to
All
make
right.
those displays easy for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, that concludes the specific items on the agenda. Next up on the agenda is our approval of minutes. I was not present last month, so I'll ask Mr. Burris to take over.
Okay. I reviewed the minutes. Mr. Eisner was here. Does Mr. Eisner have any objection to any item?
I do not.
Okay, then, Mr. Chairman, make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
All right, motion by Mr. Burris, second by Mr. Eisner. Roll call, please.
Mr. Eisner,
Yes.
Mr. Burris,
Yes.
Mr. Rabowski,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott.
Yes. Next item is staff comments,
No comments.
board comments.
The only board comment I want to make is I'm glad that we as a board
Yeah. let's
gave them
refer
the
to-
option to postpone until next time.
I only say it's come up before, and I know
Sure.
Armstrong, he objected to many of his hearings here.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir, Mr.
I
Burris.
have a question.
Get on the mic, George, if you can.
Yes, I'm sorry. In the case where people are bringing up different paperwork, if we do not have it with our paperwork, I don't think we should accept it.
You have to.
We have to?
Yeah, it's if the applicant is providing evidence or if an affected party is providing evidence at the hearing, it would be nice if they would bring it beforehand, but if they bring it during the meeting, it's to be considered. Now, we've had at other boards during a quasi-judicial proceeding where they've substantially changed the package that they're giving and it's very thick. At that point, this board, against my better judgment, I'm going to say this. At that point, this board may choose to continue the meeting to a different date so that you have time to review it. But the applicant has the ability and the right to bring whatever evidence they can and present it at the hearing.
Okay. that's-
So then what amount of information do they bring that determines whether it should
This,
move or not?
the specific instance I'm thinking of, they changed the application, what they were actually requesting. They expanded the scope of what they were requesting. So, and then they backed it out and said, oh, no, we're only going to request these certain things. But then they presented plans that had a plethora of different changes in it. So that's kind of what that was.
But on this particular
This
case,
probably won't happen here.
usually, I'm just speaking,
Of course.
Cindy usually brings us a booklet that we don't have a chance to go through.
And that's fine. She can present the evidence on behalf of her client in that manner.
Okay?
If it's just in support of the application and it's not changing anything within the application or what she's presenting isn't a far cry from what's been requested.
And
fine.
as we noticed with the comments, if she supplies that booklet ahead of time, I can email it to all of you.
Bring it.
I mean, if she does, if she doesn't want to do that, then
The case I had in mind was the Wawa case last year, that we had the gas station. And the staff added a couple of 3 pages, including the parking spaces increase and all that. That really raised a question for me, why will the staff introduce paperwork afterwards and not the applicant themselves? That was the,
Well, the staff,
that I had.
the staff is a party as well. I mean, obviously, they're here to present on behalf of the city, because remember, this board is not, while you are residents, you are not the city. You are an independent board. So we have a quasi judicial proceeding where you have evidence presented by staff in support of their recommendation, and then you have evidence supported by the applicant in support of their application. Not to ding on staff, but yeah, they probably should have it, but sometimes things come up. So.
All right.
And as long as it's germane to the application, it's something that you would probably want to consider.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Okay.
All right, board comments? Board comments?
Did we, just a question, did we give up calling people beforehand to remind them to come?
Ms. Rich did indicate that she would not be attending. I don't know, Kim, if we kind of fell out of the habit with this board because your attendance is so great, but
That's why I said that.
yeah. But Ms. Rich was the only one that indicated by email that she would not be coming, so just on her behalf, I express that.
Okay, meeting is adjourned at 7:40.
We didn't hear from the woman in the fifth row there.
You'll hear from her.
Oh, jeez.
I'm gonna say, do you want to hear
You
from her?
handle that.
That's your department.
Boy, such sarcasm, huh?
Oh, wow.